Hi everyone, it's Jill Foster here for Penny Black for the first in a series of 5 videos designed to demonstrate basic techniques for inking and stamping with our brushstroke stamps. And today's video I will be showing you how to do this stamping with our Becoming brushstroke stamp. And I really love this technique because it is quite simple and you can get such depth of color just by using one stamp and some pretty basic supplies. So speaking of supplies, here is a supply list of everything that I will be using in today's video, and I will also put this back up on screen at the very end of the video, so if you want to pause the video at that time and look at it in more detail, it will be back up at the end. And to begin, I am going to be working in a stamp positioning tool. I'm using the Misty by My Sweet Petunia, and I am stamping onto hot press watercolor paper. It's 140 pounds, and this watercolor paper has a nice smooth texture, so it is really great for capturing all of the detail that is contained within these stamps. So I'm doing this in a stamp positioning tool so I can do multiple inking and stamping of the same image in the exact same place, which is how I am able to build up the color and the shading using just one stamp. So I started by inking my stamp, and I'm using Memento ink in the color of Cantaloupe. And I just inked that top part of the flower. If there were any areas that extended beyond, I just rubbed it off with my finger. You could use a baby wipe or even just a paper towel if you wanted to. And now I'm going in with a Memento marker, and this is in the color of Cantaloupe, and just adding some extra shading. And what I like to do to figure out where I want that darker shading is I look at the packaging that came with the stamp, and I can decide then where I want to add this marker shading. And essentially what is making it darker where I apply the marker is the fact that I'm just applying more and more layers of ink, and it just gets darker and darker each time I ink up the stamp and I press that down. This is the Cantaloupe marker, and it was initially stamped with the cantaloupe, so there isn't too much contrast, which is very forgiving. If you put it in a place you didn't want it, it's not going to have a lot of contrast to begin with until you've stamped it a couple of times. I am using the brush tip of the marker to apply that ink, and I only work in pretty small sections and then stamp it down so that the ink doesn't have time to dry on the stamp. I'm not using any water with this because I want to retain the detail that is included with the stamp. But if you wanted this to have a much more loose look, you could ink your stamp and then mist it with water before stamping, and that'll give you a looser watercolor look. Now I'm going in with the Ladybug Memento marker. So this is just a red color, and I'm applying that in the same places where I had put the Cantaloupe color, only I am not extending it out quite as far. And you can see, wow, what shadows and dimension just by adding that darker color does. Now while I can still see where I put that red, I'm just kind of going over the edges of it with that Cantaloupe marker, and that's going to help blend that into the rest of the image when I stamp that down. It just softens the edges as it moves from the red into the yellow color. And you don't have to worry about mixing that marker. If you get some red on the tip of your marker, just color on a piece of scratch paper until the red colors off the tip of the marker. So now I'm actually going to take a Ladybug Memento ink pad and a jumbo ink sponge blending tool, and I'm just pouncing that onto the center of the stamp. So first I pounce it into the ink pad, pounce it onto the stamp, and then stamp that down. And the main purpose of that is just to kind of soften those edges as it blends from darker to lighter. And by applying it with the sponge, it's just a very light layer that naturally isn't quite as dark or stark as it ends on the stamp. I hope that makes sense. I'm moving on now over to this little bud that's included, and instead of inking that up with the ink pad to begin, I just started with my marker. I have a little bit more control then where I'm applying the ink, and I don't have to take as much off from the stem. I'm adding more shading with the Ladybug and the Cantaloupe markers. And now I'll begin working on the stems and the leaves. For this I'm using the Pear Tart Memento marker. Now you can really use any type of marker that you use on your stamp. So if you have distress markers or Tombow dual brush pens, the Memento markers, any type of water-based, water-soluble marker works well for this. I do find differences between the markers and the colors, how vibrant I want them to be. I also have noticed, depending on how firm the brush tip is on the marker, that will make a difference in how many times you need to do the impression, or if you sort of see lines from the brush tip on the stamp when you go to stamp it, you might need to do several impressions just to sort of even those out. I'm going in now with a little bit darker marker. This is the color Bamboo Leaves. And I'm just kind of putting that on the leaves and the stems and using a flicking motion as I do that so that it doesn't quite extend all the way to the ends of the leaves, and you get a mix of the light and the dark, which just gives even more dimension and sort of drama to those leaves. These stamps, I think, are just so beautiful. You can use just one impression like this on a card, and I'll show you a card that I make with this at the very end. You could also position it around the perimeter of your card to create a border if you wanted to stamp it multiple times. There's just so many different ways that you can use this. If you use it on a smaller panel, I'm working on 5x7, but on a smaller panel and just stamp a portion of the image, it just gives it a totally different look. Now here I'm going in with the Lilac Posies marker and just adding very little, but just a touch, just to darken up some of those areas on the flower. Basically in the areas where it would be behind another portion of the bloom, and I'm hardly using any. A little bit of this darker color goes a long way. But what I love about this technique is when you're done, you just get this piece that looks like you hand painted the entire thing. There's no lines, there's no outline. So it just has a really beautiful hand painted look that anybody can do. I also love that you can layer the colors and not have to keep mixing between multiple stamps. You just keep this one stamp in your stamp positioning tool and keep playing around and building up the color as you like it. Here where I'm adding that darker color near the center, I'm putting it on the stamp and then just kind of pouncing my finger on top to soften the edge of that. And sometimes I have to flip it over and figure out where I want that darker color. It's the reverse of the stamp when you flip it off to the side. So sometimes I just kind of have to turn it over and figure out where do I want this to be darker. And once I was done, this is what the finished image looked. I just snapped a picture of it after it was colored. And to create a card with this, I just used the 5x7 panel that I had stamped on, and I masked the outer edges with painter's tape, and I put distress inks and a little stamping on the inside. And I have another video where I show how to do that, and I'll be sure to link that up for you down in the YouTube description box below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can connect with us on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, and on our website and blog. And I'll also link to all of those down for you in the YouTube description box below. And stay tuned. I will have 4 more videos featuring brushstroke basic techniques coming very soon.